Jack Benny created the most famous imaginary vault in radio history, but the real vault he kept locked for 50 years. After his death held audio reels labeled "Do Not Open," recordings that contained confessions which could have destroyed his career. Born Benjamin Kubelski on February 14, 1894. He entered the world in Chicago because his mother, Emma Sachs, believed a big city birth certificate would help her son become a world-class violinist. Emma was frail in body but strong in vision, determined that her son would play 4 packed concert halls, while his father, Meyer, a Polish immigrant who worked his way up from peddler to saloon owner, wanted a respectable life far away from show business. But Emma's voice was louder. By age 3, Benjamin was holding a violin, and after the family returned to Waukegan, he spent his childhood practicing under the watchful eye of his mother, who sat at the piano saying "You can do it better," as he dragged the bow reluctantly across the strings. He showed remarkable talent, enough that the town raised money to send him to Europe for training. But he shocked everyone by refusing, already drifting away from the life his mother imagined. At school, he failed classes, pulled pranks, and skipped lessons, once smearing Limburger cheese behind a radiator so the school had to shut down when it melted. Expelled in his freshman year, he never returned. Instead, he took a job in the pit orchestra at the Barrison Theater, gaining real-world experience while his classmates studied algebra. His education came from his father's saloon, a lively place filled with traveling performers whose jokes, antics, and timing shaped young Benjamin's sense of humor. In 1911, the Marx Brothers visited town, and their mother Minnie offered him $7.50 a week to tour with them. But his parents refused, insisting the stage would corrupt him. That same year, at 17, Benjamin ran off anyway, joining vaudevillian Cora Salisbury in an act called From Grand Opera to Ragtime. He earned $7.50 a week, performing non-stop in dusty theaters across the Midwest. In 1912, he found himself nearly sued by famous violinist Jan Kubelik for using the similar name Ben Kubelski, forcing him to switch to Ben K. Benny. Later, a comedian named Ben Burney complained, pushing him toward the name that finally stuck, Jack Benny. After Cora left the act in 1914, Jack teamed with pianist Lyman Woods, earning as much as $400 a week by 1916 while performing from Boston to San Francisco, blending awkward violin playing with sly comedic bits. Yet, in 1917, when they performed at the Palace Theater in New York, the holy grail of vaudeville, they bombed badly. The act overshadowed by an animal routine. Crushed, the partnership ended, and Jack enlisted in the Navy during World War I. He played violin at first, but one night during a talent show, when the crowd booed his rendition of The Rosary, a fellow sailor shouted for him to tell a joke. He didn't. The room erupted. That single moment revealed the true path of his life. He joined the Great Lakes Review, and discovered he could get more applause from one well-timed line than from an hour of perfect violin playing. After the war, America was weary and broke, and Benny leaned into a cheap penny-pinching character audiences adored because they related to him. Rejoining Lyman Woods, he refined the act and began blending stand-up with music, slowly finding his voice. By the time he reached Broadway in 1924, he had mastered dry sarcasm, deliberate pauses, and playing the violin badly on purpose, a bold contrast to the prodigy he once was. Reviews called him fresh, and his name Jack Benny felt right. In 1926, while performing in The Great Temptations, he began ad-libbing entire bits, stretching 5-minute sketches into 15, despite producers begging him to stop. Backstage fights erupted, but Benny refused to drop the improvisation that made audiences roar. Around this time, fate reunited him with Sadie Marks, whom he'd first met years earlier as a starstruck teenager, now 20 and working at the May Company in Los Angeles. She sold lingerie, and Jack bought so much hosiery that she set a sales record. He visited every day and called constantly. Their romance grew slowly and awkwardly, but it lasted. By 1927, when Benny starred in Artists and Models, earning $1,500 a week, he was fully leaning into a comedic persona that mixed false bravado with self-deprecating charm. But scandal struck when a theater manager accused him of underpaying musicians, sparking union threats and whispers that he was cheap. Though he settled the matter, the reputation stuck and, later became part of his radio character. The same year, he married Sadie, now Mary Livingston, in what? During the ceremony she fainted, but when she recovered, she found roses waiting. Jack had been sending her one red rose every day, and would continue doing so for the rest of his life. In 1934, they adopted Joan, a 2-week-old baby. Mary encouraged Jack to try radio, believing vaudeville was dying, and she was right. His big break came with the Canada Dry program in 1932. But early episodes fell flat because he insisted on playing serious violin. When he stopped trying to impress and began mocking himself, instead, ratings exploded. In 1933, he moved to CBS, froze his age permanently at 39 for comedic effect, and introduced the now legendary vault gag filled with guards, booby traps, and absurd details. By the late 1930s, his cast was complete. Don Wilson, the booming announcer, Phil Harris, the suave bandleader, and Eddie Anderson Rochester, the groundbreaking actor who became the first black performer with a regular national radio role. Jack refused to appear without him, even when Southern stations protested. From 1937 to 1945, Benny was one of the highest-paid performers in the country, earning about $3 million a year, today's equivalent. Despite jokes about cheapness, he donated huge sums to war bonds, toured with the USO, and performed for more than 3 million troops. The Vault made its official radio debut in 1945, with sound effects that listeners swore they could see. By 1948, he turned the Vault into a Christmas tradition, mixing holiday shopping with penny-pinching humor so relatable that fans believed the Vault was real. His real finances were far more complicated. He made $375,000 a year, but claimed only $19 in entertainment expenses, prompting IRS scrutiny that he folded into his show as comedy. His film career began in 1929 with The Hollywood Review, a success overshadowed by his stiff performance. MGM dropped him after his next film flopped, and though Broadway Melody of 1936 improved his reputation, clashes with the director branded him as difficult. In 1937, he became involved in a jewelry smuggling scandal with a conman posing as a diplomat. Benny pleaded guilty, paid $10,000, and received a suspended sentence. George Burns, also implicated, faced fines too. Both men turned the scandal into comedy, winning the public back with self-mockery. But in 1945, Jack released The Hornblows at Midnight, a fantasy film doomed by timing. It premiered 8 days after President Roosevelt died. Audiences stayed away, critics panned it, and Benny later turned it into a running joke for decades. When he entered television in 1950, at age 56, he wasn't sure how he'd look on screen, but his comedic timing translated perfectly. By 1952, 20 million people watched weekly. He pioneered modern sitcom structure, breaking the fourth wall, blending real life with fiction, and using running gags. Johnny Carson appeared in 1955, and Jack mentored him, influencing the rhythm of late-night television for generations. In the 1960s, Benny continued innovating, weaving Cold War commentary into Vault sketches and hosting specials with figures like Bob, Hope, and the Beach Boys. But the cigarettes he promoted for 15 years were killing him. In 1974, he grew dizzy during a performance and was soon diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He worked until the end, dying on December 26 at age 80. George Burns, Sinatra, Hope, and Carson visited him in his final days. After his death, the world discovered the truth behind the stingy persona. He left a fortune of over $5 million, about $35 million today, owned a 1729 Stradivarius violin, and quietly funded charities, orchestras, scholarships, and even $39 trust funds for every baby born in Waukegan. On October 5, 1961, his Daily Roses to Mary continued even after death. He had arranged for a florist to deliver one red rose to her every day for the rest of her life. Jack Benny transformed comedy with silence, subtlety, and timing so precise that generations of comedians from Seinfeld to Larry David built entire careers on the framework he pioneered. His 3 stars on the Walk of Fame reflect his mastery of film, radio, and television, and letters released after his death revealed his quiet support for civil rights. The man known as the world's greatest cheapskate was, in truth, one of its most generous. What the public never saw was how deeply Jack's comedy shaped the generation that came after him. When young comics studied his timing, they didn't just imitate him, they dissected him. His pause, that famous Benny stare, the slow turn of the head, these became textbook examples in every writer's room from New York to Los Angeles. Writers for Sid Caesar, Carol Burnett, and even early Saturday Night Live admitted they borrowed from Benny's rhythm. He had proved that comedy didn't need noise or chaos. Sometimes the funniest thing a person could do was stand still, raise an eyebrow, and let silence squeeze the laugh out of the audience. But there was something else inside those sealed 1945 Vault tapes, something more personal than jokes. When archivists threaded the brittle reels onto their machine, they expected routines or unused sketches. What they heard instead was Jack talking to himself. Recordings made late at night, alone, when the world thought the Vault was just a gimmick. These weren't meant for radio or stage. They were confessions. In the first tape, his voice was quieter than anyone had ever heard it, stripped of the bright, confident tone he used on air. He talked about vaudeville dying around him in the late 1920s, about walking past shuttered theaters and feeling like his youth was being boarded up. He said he didn't know if radio would save him or destroy him. He worried that he wasn't good enough, that audiences laughed at him only because he let them. He admitted something even Mary never knew, that after bombing at the Palace in 1917, he almost quit show business entirely. One night, he sat on a roof in New York, staring at the lights, wondering what he would be if he wasn't Jack Benny. He said, "I didn't think anyone would remember me. I didn't think I had anything special, so I played the fool before anyone else could call me one." The tapes only got more revealing. Another reel recorded during the war years had Jack describing the guilt he carried for not fighting on the front lines. Even though he performed for millions of troops and raised more money for war bonds than almost any celebrity, he still felt like he hadn't done enough. He said he played the cheap man on radio because that character felt safer than the real one. The real me, he whispered into the recorder, is someone who is afraid of not deserving the applause. There was a tape dated 1943 where he talked about losing friends in the war and learning about relatives in Poland who died in camps. His voice cracked when he said comedy felt useless some nights. He admitted that during long drives between USO shows, he rehearsed jokes inside his head as a way to push the grief away. But he also said he'd never felt closer to his audience than during those years. On another tape, he confessed his fear of aging. Even before he made the joke about being eternally 39, he was terrified of turning 40. Not because of the number, but because he thought audiences would leave him behind. He admitted he created the 39 gag for selfish reasons. It made him feel like he still had time to stay relevant, time to be funny, time to matter. One reel, labeled simply Mary, was different from the rest. It wasn't comedic or confessional. It was tender. Jack talked about how Mary saved him in ways she never understood. He said she grounded him, gave him direction, and pushed him into radio when he was too scared to try. He said her intelligence intimidated him, and her wit made him better. He admitted that he played the cheap husband on radio because he didn't know how to play the grateful one in real life. The most emotional tape was recorded a few months after Joan left home in the 1950s. Jack blamed himself for the distance between them. He wondered whether his constant traveling and work had made him a stranger in his own house. He said, "I know millions of people think they know me, but some days I feel like my own daughter doesn't." The archivists who listened to the tapes said there were long pauses, moments where they could hear Benny breathing, as if debating whether to keep speaking, and then he talked about losing control of his own show in the last seasons, about feeling overshadowed by younger comedians, about worrying that television was leaving him behind just like vaudeville once had. Toward the end of the last tape, his voice grew softer. He said he didn't fear death, but he feared being forgotten. He hoped someone, someday, would open the tapes and understand that behind the jokes was a man who never stopped trying, a man who feared failure more than he ever feared poverty, a man who learned to turn insecurity into laughter because it was the only way he knew how to survive. And then, almost like a final punchline, but spoken with real vulnerability, he said, "If you remember me at all, remember the silence between the jokes. That was always the real me. Silence. No customers. No cameras. No negotiations. Just the Las Vegas heat pressing down on him like a reminder. You're losing control." He sat on the hood of his truck, staring at the sky, replaying every mistake, every dollar lost, every relationship broken, every warning sign he ignored. But the world wasn't done hitting him, because the very next morning, before sunrise, Rick received another call, this time from a number he recognized. His oldest son. There was no hello, no small talk, just a quiet voice saying, "Dad, we need to talk." Rick drove across town, stomach in knots, expecting more conflict, another lawsuit, another betrayal, another bill. But what he got was worse, much worse. His son looked tired, older than his years, burdened. "Dad, I feel like this family is falling apart. You're falling apart, and I can't watch it anymore." Rick didn't know what to say. He wanted to be strong. He always had been. The tough negotiator, the rock of the family, the man who never blinked. But today, he blinked. "I'm trying," he whispered. "I really am." For a moment, they just sat there, father and son, two lives tangled in the same storm, neither knowing how to fix the damage. But then his son dropped something on the table, a file, a thick one. "What's this?" Rick asked. His son hesitated. "It's everything you don't want to see. Every debt, every lien, every late notice, every account you've been ignoring." Rick opened the file. Page after page after page. It was all there. The truth he'd spent years running from. And then came the sentence that broke him. "Dad, you're drowning." The words hit harder than any bill, any lawsuit, any headline, because this time, it wasn't coming from a lawyer or a reporter, it was coming from his own blood. That night, Rick didn't go home. He drove, for hours, through empty highways, past neon lights, away from everything familiar. Until finally, he pulled over outside the old neighborhood where he grew up. Small houses, quiet streets, a place where nobody knew about alimony or lawsuits or failing empires. He sat there, in the dark, staring at the house where he took his first steps, the house where his father taught him how to work, the house where he learned that life doesn't give you anything, you earn it. But somewhere along the way, he forgot that lesson. He got comfortable. He trusted the wrong people. He took his success for granted. And now, he was paying the price. Literally. Emotionally. Publicly. He leaned back in his seat, closed his eyes, and whispered into the empty night, "I don't know how to fix this." For the first time in decades, he felt completely alone. But fate wasn't done with him. because the next morning, as he walked into the pawn shop expecting another disaster, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. The staff, all of them, were standing together, Corey. The employees who'd watched Rick carried the business for years. People who'd seen his highs and lows, his triumphs and failures. And then Corey stepped forward. "Dad, we're not letting you lose this." Rick frowned. "What are you talking about?" "We're stepping in," Corey said. "All of us." Rick shook his head. "I don't need charity." "This isn't charity," Chumley interrupted. "This is family." Rick didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He'd spent years thinking he was holding everything together alone. But here they were, every person he believed he had to protect, now trying to protect him. Corey handed him a folder. Not bills this time. A plan. Cost cuts. New business strategies. Marketing ideas. Tourist partnerships. Online auctions. New filming contracts already in negotiation. And a proposal for restructuring the shop's finances. "You're not done, old man," Corey said with a grin. "Not even close." Rick looked around the room. At the people he thought he'd failed. At the empire he thought he'd lost. At the legacy he thought was slipping away. And something inside him shifted. A spark of fight, the same fire that built the pawn shop from a broken little store into an empire. He straightened his shoulders, took a deep breath, and said, "If we're doing this, we're doing it my way." A grin spread across Corey's face. "There's the Rick we know." The day marked the beginning of Rick's fight back. He cut expenses, negotiated new deals, liquidated dead inventory, rebuilt relationships he'd neglected. For the first time in years, he asked for help. Pride had almost destroyed him. Humility was about to save him, but the comeback wouldn't be easy. The debts were still massive. The lawsuits were still active. The media was still circling like vultures. And deep down, Rick knew the worst storm was still ahead, because the next challenge wouldn't come from the bank, or the courts, or even his finances. It would come from something far more personal, something that would push him to the edge, and force him to face the truth about who he really was. The comeback had begun, but the hardest chapter of Rick Harrison's life was still waiting for him.